there's baseline habits that are formed, that are developed, that ultimately take you to the goal that you want to go to. There is still no guarantee that even if you do X, Y, and Z, you're going to have this kind of success. If you want to do great things, you have to set big goals. I was invited by a Navy SEAL, guy from SEAL Team 6, ayahuasca. So what is that? You have these shamans, which are these kind of mystical people.
I was a combat veteran and law enforcement officer.
And really what potential is people realize that this person's got something different in them that most others don't.
Welcome back to the Tim Teaches podcast. I'm your host, Tim McCoy. Today I have the absolute pleasure of being joined by Mark Pattison, former NFL player. You're the first NFL player to climb the highest mountain peaks of each of the 7 continents. You climbed Mount Everest in 2021, which also became an award-winning documentary. You're a philanthropist. You work for Sports Illustrated. I just watched a documentary that was produced, a short video journey into alternative healing, which is kind of weird for me because Rythmia is what got me to do this podcast. I went there in December and had quite a life-changing experience there. And so when I saw that documentary and you were on it, it shocked me, actually, because we were already scheduled. So I appreciate you taking the time and love to hear your story.
Well, where do you want me to start?
Man, how do you go from the NFL to climbing mountains?
Yeah, I mean, I think with all these things, there's a through line, right? And it's a foundational formula for me that I found sort of my secret of success. Now, that doesn't have to apply to everybody, and certainly everybody needs to do what works for them, but it really started, way back. We all have talents in various things that we do, and it could be swimming, or it doesn't even have to be athletic. Maybe you're a great actor, or you're an aspiring actor, or something like that, or a business person. But early on, it was pretty evident that I was born with certain athletic skills, and that carried me through in high school. And from there, I got a lot of scholarship offers, and kind of the path and really the journey that I was on is being taught by my former Hall of Fame coach, Don James. Now, a lot of people today don't know who that is. They're like, who, because he passed away maybe 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. But we all know who Nick Saban is, right? Yeah. Nick Saban coached under Don James. All this stuff that he does about discipline, about consistency, about what kind of player that you want to be in life, all came from Don James that Nick Saban now preaches. He's become a master at it, right? But all those basic fundamentals are the exact same thing that I was taught. And because of that, we went to multiple Rose Bowls and Orange Bowl, and we were always in the top 10. And it seemed like I was at the University of Washington for 5 years, and at least half that time we were number one, ranked number one in the country. And so when you have success, it's usually not just luck. Luck is winning the lotto. Having success over a period of time, usually there's if you look, there's baseline habits that are formed, that are developed, that ultimately take you to the goal that you want to go to. And for me, it was really about that competitive greatness. And that allowed me to get into, really understand the path that I was on in college, which then set me up to go and I was fortunate to get drafted by the Raiders back in the day. And, I was never like a superstar player, but you always have to have your different tiers. But I reached my personal ceiling in the NFL. I played 5 years. And then I'd love to say I retired, but I was really thrown out. But then life happens, right? Then you get out, and like so many different players, you go through this period of time where you're asking the question, well, what's next? What am I going to do? Where do I take all that energy, all that stuff that I've learned, everything that just came out of my mouth about the foundational principles, about work habit and work ethic, and about goal setting. All of a sudden, you don't have that master goal, and you've been used to achieving at such a high level that you're like, I don't even know what that level is, and I don't really have any skills to go do things, because what I did really well was get to football. That's what I was in wide receiver.
You were born with that, or taught by your parents, or is that just a learned habit that how do you get that drive?
Well, that's a great question, but I think, I had the athletic ability, but like all things, they call this, there's a little word called potential. Mm-hmm. And really what potential is people realize that this person's got something different in them that most others don't, but you haven't reached your potential. You haven't reached your ceiling. So that's why they call it potential. So there's a gap in between. And what I really needed is understanding, really what the roadmap was. I didn't understand what the roadmap was, because I was just better than everybody else in high school.
Yeah.
And when I got to college, all of a sudden, people are lifting weights and they're gunned up and they're confident and, they're cocky and I didn't even have the body. Forget the athlete demo. I didn't even have the body to be able to go and take on those hits. In those days, it was called the Pac-10. Now it's the Pac-12, and that's somewhat folded into the Big Ten. But look, again, we all need direction, and it was like a military boot camp for me to go in and really understand what it took to succeed and win. And I did all those things. And here was the beauty about it, is that even though I went through this pyramid of success and going through all the different steps, there was still no guarantee that even if you do X, Y, and Z, you were going to have this kind of success. But I knew that if I did all these things, it would put me in the best position of success. And I can tell you, it's easy to look back now, but at the time when, there's like 2 or 3 years of really dark times, like, we're going to play, I'm doing my best, you get knocked down, I wasn't, where I wanted to be on the depth chart. And, finally you have a couple breaks and things go the right way and, some circumstances and some games, and I got elevated up. The NFL, going back to what they do today, which is, I think they have learned over time. And so they've got all these really amazing programs called the Trust, which now have all these mentors, which you can go, and if you want to be a stockbroker, you can go shadow somebody from Merrill Lynch. If you want to be a broadcaster, you can go to NBC, and they have all these different places that you can go to really start to understand, is this something that I could see doing in my life, coaching, whatever you want to do. They didn't have that back then. So back in the day when you were done playing, you literally went off the cliff. You had no idea. And now I'm 30 years old and I have no skills other than catching a football. And so now I had to go back to the bottom, which, as an NFL player, that from your ego, from that standpoint, it's hard to be making, you're at the top of the financial chart of, earners. You go from nothing to something back to nothing.
Yeah,
right?
That happens pretty fast for most of those guys, didn't it? Back in the day, anyway. I mean, it was.
Yeah, and it still does. The average life, I think, was a year and a half or something of guys, playing. So it's just like you got to make your hay while you can. And as we are talking right now, whenever this podcast is going to run, the landscape is literally changing with the NIL, and college players can be making millions and actually probably do better in college than they may do in the NFL someday. So I want to get back to your root question. How does somebody that played in the NFL get to climbing mountains? I'd grown up in Seattle, Washington, and up in Seattle, there's a lot of mountains. There's a Cascade Range, and there's Mount Rainier and some other big mountains up there. And so, I grew up looking at the mountains out my window. I also grew up climbing and spending a lot of time, nothing extreme, but just, every day with my dad, backpacking, day hikes, type of thing. And after I got out of the NFL and after I established a career, it took me a couple of years to do that. And I got married and everything else. I ran, 10 years ago or so, I ran into some challenging times. And so really what I had to do is go back and tap back into that bag of goodies and really remind myself of goal setting, of trying to put out a big ass goal, big, hairy, audacious goal that was so grand that would take me out of this place. And so I did some research and found that no NFL player had ever climbed the seven summits. The seven summits are the highest peaks in the world. The highest one, of course, is Mount Everest on each continent. And so about 10 years ago, I set out to do this journey, and I finished it a couple of years ago. And I continue to climb crazy mountains. I've been on the Matterhorn and the Eiger and Mont Blanc and others. And I just love that challenge, and again, it really helped me just really understand there's a goal and what are all the micro steps I have to do on a day-to-day basis to achieve that goal and have that kind of success.
Where the hell do you even begin? I mean, you were starting to climb when you were younger and you lived by Mount Rainier. I spent some time in Fort Lewis, Washington, and we would look at all the big mountains out there. What's your first major climb? And did you go with the whole crew of people you knew, or was it kind of a solo adventure?
Yeah, well, that's interesting you asked that because I had done Rainier years ago, and when I was like 10, I did Mount St. Helens, which would later blow its top off. So, that was so I had a teeny tiny experience, and I didn't climb. There's a difference between climbing and hiking, and my day hike, it's like in the woods and go on a 4 mile hike and come back with my dad. And that was great. And I think that really kind of set the foundational place. I used to train going up and down, just simple things, but pretty steep. Yeah, again, I really had to understand, how does somebody go about climbing the seven summits of the world? And so I called a guy that owns a mountain guide service. I said, "How do you do this?" And so he gave me a roadmap and laid out how he would do it in terms of climbing. Each one kind of test your skills in different ways. And the first one I did is I went down to Kilimanjaro, down Tanzania, and I climbed that mountain. That's 19,333 feet. And it's interesting, 'cause it's actually the highest mountain from floor to ceiling.
Oh,
So
wow.
like Mount Everest, the highest this way, but you also start a lot higher. So this is key. You're literally starting at ground zero. You're in the jungle, going through, there's monkeys flying over in the jungle, and there's elephants, and then you keep going up, and it just gets, higher and higher. And I've actually done that twice, but that was the first, and that really tests your altitude. Am I somebody who can actually handle the altitude of going up and take on, it's not a technical mountain necessarily, but it's just the last day it gets fairly steep, but it's just, can you go? And the second time I was on there, actually the first time too, I went with strangers. Every time I go with strangers, nobody will go with me. At my age, or Riptech, I'm going to Palm Springs and golf and there's a mountain.
That sounds all right.
No, it does sound all right. So I question, where my head's at sometimes, but it's definitely something I've had to, it's called adventure travel, and you travel, you go far places, and I'm always going by myself, but with an organized group, and we all meet at XYZ hotel, or somebody picks me up or something, and you get to know these people for a week. And so, talk about growth, personal growth, in terms of for me, like taking myself outside my boundary, because I'd always travel with people. Now it's just like, here's the goal, and then just go down there and hope that you're climbing with a bunch of cool people. And as it all turns out, you end up meeting a bunch of people.
So you saved Everest for last of the seven. Is that the hardest, most technical mountain, or is it just that's how you laid it out?
It's all the above. Like you get into Denali as a mother, and that's up in Alaska, and that's very difficult. The first time in 2017, I got pushed back, and then I came back in 2018 and made it. First time in 2017, I was under minus 90 degree up. Then we got in a snowstorm. It was awful for a week. We were in your tent. But Mount Everest, you're up there this is one of the things that most people don't understand. You're up there for 2 months. It's not like going on a weekend thing. It's 2 months living at 17,500 feet on rocks, on ice, eating shit food, going up and down. You have to acclimate. Going up is, going up and then coming back down, go up higher and come back down. You're trying to produce more red blood cells in your system, so you have more oxygen that's flowing. Yeah, there's a lot of people who can't handle it. There's a lot of people that started with this that didn't finish. And I was actually supposed to go in 2020, and then the world shut down. I was literally had my bags packed. I was in LA just about like a week before I was going to take off, and they shut the world down. And so we had to reset everything, which is hard because you have a goal. It'd be like if you're playing the Super Bowl, you have the Olympics. Yeah, they canceled it for another year, so I had to reset everything and all the goals, and that was really hard. But you're up there for 2 months. It's super technical. You're going through the Kumba ice fall, climbing multiple ice walls, the steepness, the harshness. Once you get up in the death zone, which I'd never been in a death zone before, and there's a third less oxygen. I happened to run out of oxygen a couple times. I was up there. I got snowblind. I had a lot of things go wrong, go south for me, and I kind of willed my way through getting to the top and back down, but I was miserable going through that. But Denali is like 21 days, and that's a bitch, and it's hard, and you're carrying your own weight and 137 pounds on your back. But when you get to Everest, although you're not carrying all that weight, it's just the time on mountain, the mental anguish, and just the struggle. I mean, you got to be mentally strong and stay in the zone and not lose focus of why you're there to actually make it.
Are you just doing it for your own shits and giggles, like just to see if I can do this and how far you can push yourself? Like, I, I, I don't understand. Like, man, you said it was a death trap, and every one of those mountains sounds like a death trap to me. So, what keeps you going to keep doing this?
That's a great question. And I'm in the process of writing a book right now about that. But, I didn't always think of myself this way, but as I look back on my life, I think I am driven in this manner. It was taught by my coach, Don James, and that is, if you want to do great things, you have to set big goals. The difference between myself and a lot of others, I'm not special. I can guarantee you that. But what I am is committed to every single day showing up and doing what I need to do towards inching down the field and getting closer to that goal. And when I set a goal, and I'm, at the time when I set this 7-7 goal, for example, I wasn't looking at Everest. I was looking at only the first goal and the only thing that mattered. It's like playing a game. Yeah, I want to go to the Rose Bowl, but the only thing that matters in that particular moment, the only thing that matters is that first game. And in this case, it was that first mountain. So it was Kilimanjaro, right? And then the second one, I went off to Russia, and everyone had some new nuance, some skill that I had to learn. And I'd focused just on those skills and the conditioning that I had to do. I also really doubled down, and this is about 7 years ago now. I moved to Sun Valley, Idaho. We live at 6,000 feet. And just in terms of the training, and you hear this sometimes, like when people go to play the Broncos, they haven't been conditioned enough. Just because the Broncos are so much better conditioned because they train at, a mile-high stadium, right?
Yeah.
And there is a difference. And it probably saved my life on Everest when I ran out of O's. I spent the entire night at 26.5 with no oxygen, which is damn good. Yeah, which is tough. But you're talking about goals and, chunking those goals up, only focusing on the only thing I need and the most important thing I need to do, and then being relentless at going after those things. Same thing, you mentioned about Sports Illustrated. When I first got there, we were ranked 17. We had to do some things to change, and my goal is number one. We're now number one. 7 years later, we're number one. And there were certain strategies that we had to change. We had to commit to it. And again, the daily dose of how we're going to go about this and not doing things like with Sports Illustrated had done in the past. So how is that going to adjust and change from the training I'd always done as a football player to a Mountaineer? It's a different skill set, right? But it's learning these things and doing these things every single day and being relentless about always showing up and never taking a day off.
It's what I'm trying to do with this podcast. I'm 3 months into it, and to get somebody like you on here, I mean, it's incredible for me. This is the biggest weekend for me, so I appreciate you coming on. I'm kind of curious because, and this might be a little bit different than what you talk about, because I did see that ayahuasca documentary about Rythmia, and that's been my jam lately. Like, how'd you get hooked up with that? Did you participate in?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let's just lay out what that is. So first of all, ayahuasca. So what is that? It's a plant that you can find in Costa Rica, Nicaragua, and some other places. And typically it's more of these tropical spots where you can get this, and you have these shamans, which are these kind of mystical people that actually administer this. In the past, these shamans have been these kind of one-offs in the jungle, and it's kind of like, just show up and more of a hippie type thing. And this guy, Jerry, who would remind you a lot of somebody from the Grateful Dead, he had done really well in business. He had a bunch of money, and he decided to create this center down in Costa Rica, which I was invited to come down and do a documentary on. I was invited by a Navy SEAL, a guy from SEAL Team 6. There's another guy on the show called Southern Charm. He's a beauty. And then there's this other guy from Brazil that came in and Jiu-Jitsu champion, world champions. And so the idea was that those three were going to go through it. And my whole goal for me was to go and interview them after every time they did this and get their feedback before, after, my impressions of what Rythmia was all about. Facility is amazing, as you know. There's massages and mud baths and hot tubs and cold tubs and lunch and the food. I mean, the food's unbelievable. It's all pretty much, just everything is so clean, right? And so it's really getting people who have been carrying whatever demons that they have, where you take this mother ayahuasca, as they say, and it goes down, and it's usually a 4 or 5 day process. You drink this little fluid, and it makes you hallucinate and do all kinds of stuff. And the goal is everybody has their own different journey, but for majority of people, by the time they get to the end of this week, they're really starting to get some clarity in their life on what they need to do to go out and accomplish things that they want to do.
Were you able to participate, or did you just stand back and kind of watch these guys do it and document it?
That's what I did. And that was the deal going into it. You can't have too many people out of their mind, So it was an enjoyable experience, I would say. From my standpoint, just watching this, and I was really impressed by the facilities and the people, as you know. And the only kind of takeaway I had at the end of the day is that, just like everything I'm talking about from what I do on a day-to-day basis, is that if you truly want to change a pattern or a habit, it takes relentless energy of showing up every single day. And there's just far too many people that fall back into the old habits of what they used to do with the way their mind thinks. And that's, again, where I've been able to succeed in that way and have great clarity about, where I'm going, and I stick to it. Other people fall back into old habits because they haven't changed up their friend group or their daily habits or the way they eat or whatever their issue might be.
I don't think I would take it if I was you. It sounds like you got everything figured out. I was a combat veteran and law enforcement officer and a bunch of stuff, and was suffering from PTSD for almost 20 years. And so my brother-in-law is on the board of directors down there, Earl Koski. And so he's the one who kind of was like, hey man, you should probably come down here and do this. And so I went into it. Yeah, I went into it not knowing anything about it. And those guys, they changed my life. I mean, it was like a light switch for me. It just really changed my life. And so it's been about a year since I did it. And I've been down there 3 times since. I was just kind of curious when I saw your book, and then my brother-in-law just sent me this little snippet of the documentary that you're working on. And I'm like, wait, I'm talking to this dude this weekend. So it was pretty cool. Do you think those guys who went through it are they going to get the healing that they expected? Do you think it'll be?
They all had different experiences. The guy, the world champion,
Xander. Yeah, that's a hard one.
He definitely got a lot out of it. He's probably the most emotional of the 3. And I think he got a ton out of it. The guy from the reality TV show,
Shep Rose,
which is Shep. Shep's a great guy. And, the whole show is based around these hot guys and hot girls. And they all come from this affluent society in Charleston. This is all true. And they hook up and they drink and they socialize, and, everything is kind of, so the reality show is kind of his life anyhow. And he's such a great guy and such a big personality that, he's kind of let, I think, a little bit of that stuff get out of control. So I think he found some big answers on some directions that he wants to go to. The ironic thing out of all this is the third guy, Mike, who is the SEAL Team 6 badass dude, who's been through, I can't even imagine what he's been through. And so these are the guys who are crawling in the tunnels and going after his mom, types of things. And he has had some demons that he's had to deal with. And he didn't feel like he got really any value out of it. It didn't really work for him, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't know really at the end of the day, the true essence of who, again, do these guys all need to go back? Mike's for sure never going back. And the other 2, I think, would be very open to going back. So they just all 3 had very different reactions.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how it affects people differently. I mean, I know for me, and it looked like he cut out after the first 2 days. And so they kind of recommended doing all 4 because the last night is Yahe night, and that's the grand finale and stuff. Before we wrap up, what's kind of your jam? Are you helping people? You're doing public speaking and stuff like that, but are you also doing some sort of?
I don't do coaching. So I mean, look, here's the deal. At the end of the day, it's just, I'm a executive for Sports Illustrated. I run the biggest part of it, the team site. That's my day-to-day job. Because I've had these very unique experiences, I'm blessed, right? to be able to play in the NFL, to be able to climb the seven summits, to be the first guy to be able to do that. The NFL came to me in 2021 and said, we want to film a documentary on it. And then they submitted it for Emmy. I was nominated for Best Cinematography, which I did all the camera work on the mountain, which I don't know a thing about cameras, and Best Picture. And it ended up in 2022. It was back in New York at Lincoln Center, and I won a Emmy for Best Picture. It was insane. Yeah. And then, to be a part of, well, we talked about Sports Illustrated and the NFL on Climbing Mountain. So, I've done a bunch of interesting things. And so there's a lot of life lessons that are in there that I can share and that people, when called upon, but that's not my main gig. My main gig, I do that for fun and I really enjoy it. But because there's so many things going on and I've just had so many unique experiences of playing in bowl games and playoff games. And I know all these people and famous people and not famous people and I've started some different companies and venture-backed companies, and I've had some exits and taken one and about to be two companies public and things like that. There's a lot of people like, oh, how does this all happen? Like, how do you make all that work? And so from time to time, I'll go and speak in front of people, and I enjoy doing that. And I do that. And then as of recent, kind of my 2025, I've been at work probably 8 months into this, but we're talking right now in January, but I don't know if it's by mid-year or April or June or something like that. I have a book coming out. And so, I look forward to that. That's a big process, probably one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. But anyways, I'm committed to it and getting closer to that end.
Do you have a title for the book yet?
It could be Finding My Summit, Finding Your Summit, same thing as my podcast, Searching for the Summit, which is the name of the movie, that came out, Searching for the Summit. But my podcast was called Finding Your Summit, and I think that's very metaphorical. So I all those things are kind of in play right now, so we'll see how it comes out.
Right on, man. Well, it is Sunday. There's probably some sort of football on. I got my kids and babysitters, and I'm trying to run 7 different episodes this weekend because I have a real job because this doesn't pay me anything yet.
Sure.
So I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. You got anything else you want to throw out there for people if they watch this and they're looking for any kind of advice from you? Because I'm sure you got a lifetime of advice, man.
Yeah, no, I don't have any advice for anybody unless they ask for it, specifically. But like anybody wants to reach out to me, please do. markl.com, pretty easy. Mark, MarkPattison, NFL.com. It's all there.
Cool. Man, I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me and let you warm up. You just got out of hiking, so I appreciate you.
All right, buddy. Hey, listen, nothing but the best of luck to you in the future. Love to hear from you, in 6 months or a year.
All right. Appreciate you.
Take care.